Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Yard Sign, the most important and relevant podcast in politics. Your host, as always, Jonny Torres. Thank you so much for watching. We have got a packed show. It is the night before the primary, and we're going to get there. So that is definitely on today's list of stuff to talk about. But let's go ahead through tonight's topics. We're going to talk about the latest polling in the presidential campaign, showing the race tightening up. And all of this right as the DNC is getting ready to kick off their virtual convention. Will this new convention show, I don't even know what to call it, will this virtual convention have any kind of impact, contrary to, all the previous conventions we've always had? The Middle East peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, huge news that the media, just blatantly ignoring. As they like to do. The blessing that is Kamala Harris as she joins the Biden campaign, and that's Anibal's wording. We'll get to that in a second. And of course, primary night or primary night eve for us, and then tomorrow night we'll drop a little hint here. We're actually going to be doing a show live covering election results tomorrow night. So make sure you join us back here. About 6:30, 7 o'clock on Facebook, and we'll be covering the results both locally and statewide and nationally as they come in throughout the night. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and I won't divulge our location, but it's certainly going to be a fun one. Joining me, as always, these guys, can't get enough of this show. Right next to me, Anibal, Cabrera, and down at the bottom square, we got Chris Verkuilen. What's up, guys?
I was actually told I was going to be next to you as opposed to in the bottom.
Well,
this is not part of my contract.
That's all right. We'll take it up
with
contracts.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, let's not go down that road. We got a lot to talk about. Let's jump right into the new polling that came out, showing about 9 points. I mean, Anibal, you wanted to kind of lead on this story. This is obviously not the territory the Democrats want to be in this close to November. Now, again, as I mentioned in the tease of the show, will the convention have the same impact it always has? There's always a convention bump that lasts about a week or so following it. I don't think people are going to pay any attention to it. I don't think anybody's going to care about this virtual convention. It just doesn't have the same, kind of ceremonial aspect to it. What do you think, Anibal?
The beauty of the convention is seeing all the delegates and having that big, enthusiastic group of people together, Democrat, Republican, to have that kind of energy that goes into the party and then dispenses to the rest of the nation and those delegates with their party's affiliations. However, this time around, and the polling that was released by CNN, that was conducted by SSRS, is quite low energy. That is definitely what is being discussed when it comes to what's happening now. It is absolutely a nightmare when it comes to the Democrat side of showing very little enthusiasm for this ticket, very little enthusiasm for the whole process that's going on right now. And you see that within the numbers. It is quite severe. Whereas a month ago, Trump was trailing Biden by almost 14 points, 12 to 14 points, depending on it. Now, it's tightened so much that it's within the margin of error. And this wasn't a Trump versus Biden poll. This was a Trump-Pence versus Biden-Kamala Harris. And that shows that she is not giving much of a bump whatsoever as the vice president pick that was given to her. So that's a huge problem right there. And they're having big problems with male minorities in the Hispanic and the African-American community. And they're having a huge problem within suburbia now also. So I think we're seeing what's happened in Portland, what's happened in Seattle, what's happened in New York and California is really starting to play a part of the polling. And he's in a better position than he was 4 years ago.
Well, look, I mean, let's be honest. The only people that are truly excited about Kamala Harris are the white liberals.
White suburban moms. It's insane.
Yeah. Who wanted this kind of affirmative action pick. And honestly, I think because they were so upfront about the fact that they were going to pick a woman of color, essentially kind of lets out all the excitement out of the bag. I think they kind of shot themselves in the foot in terms of momentum, because if they would have just agreed internally to making that kind of a decision and then having it had been Kamala Harris or anybody else, I think there would have been a lot of like, oh, wow, and a lot of excitement coming out of the announcement. But instead, they had, what, a month, 2 months, for everybody to beat up the whole decision-making process. And then on top of that, I mean, she was one of the front runners this whole time. And so when they picked her, it wasn't that much of a surprise. Nobody was really like, oh, wow, didn't see that coming. And so I think it really let all of the wind out of their sails. And nobody is really excited about this ticket whatsoever. I think this plays right into Trump's hands, especially given the anti-police environment that the Democrats have been fostering now for the past 3 to 4 months. Verkuilen, what do you think?
Well, to your point, I don't think the left really equates Kamala to being a cop because of how radical she's come out in the last 4 months. She's a chameleon, comma chameleon. So she kind of just, she just kind of floats her way into whatever belief system she needs to purvey in order to get into office. But I think what happened here is people realize it's not just we're not worried about Biden, but once you put Kamala into the mix, then people are worried. Then you start to see people are worried about her being in office, so they start turning, the moderates turning towards conservatism, which is great for us. I mean, thanks Joe Biden for our lead, that we're going to get here. I will say that this may be a result of CNN running out of places that do polling that are actually giving what they want to put on air. So they were forced to put this because they couldn't find a poll that was going to give them the lead they're looking to purvey. But I will say at this point in every race, presidential race, the same thing happened with the Hillary Trump race as well. We saw this lead, this massive lead, and it was as we're seeing right now, we saw this massive lead being advertised for a long time, and then you get to the final stretch and it starts going away. They can't hide it anymore. So I think that's really an indication of something that happens all the time.
I agree. I think what we're seeing now also is that there was a split within the polling of the national and then the 15 battleground states. Now they added like Colorado in that list of 15 battlefields, which I don't think Colorado is will be a battleground state this cycle. However, that is even tighter. It's 49 Biden, 48 Trump, which is insane.
Oh wow!
So these numbers now show the enthusiasm for the president. They show that, economically things are getting back to normal. Kids are going back to school. People are taking the mask and health-wise more seriously this coming up. So again, and we're still, 80-something days out? The election, there's so much more time. And the polls are showing this now. And if Trump keeps on getting more positive notes with the economy and less than 1 million people that are filing for unemployment and people start going back to work, you're going to see these numbers continue to rise because people don't care. As long as they have money in their pockets, they don't care.
Well, I'll tell you the other thing about, again, the excitement and momentum playing such a big part in this, because, I don't know that the average person that isn't involved in politics like we are understands the importance of momentum. When Marco Rubio ran in 2010 against Charlie Crist for the U.S. Senate, it was momentum, especially at the grassroots level and then the Tea Party level, that basically made him a formidable candidate, because right out of the gate, he was polling at like 3%, and he was running against an incoming governor. Imagine a no-name in today's political environment running against somebody like Ron DeSantis. You would think it's impossible for them to win, especially given how popular Charlie Crist was at the time. And so momentum gets you a lot of things. It gets you votes, which is obviously the most important thing, but it also gets you a lot of fundraising down the stretch, especially when you're looking at such a highly contested battle, for the presidency. But that also goes down for the local races as well. Once these guys get past these primaries, it's going to be super important for them to be able to recover financially from a battle of a primary and get ready to battle for a general election. That's why, party leadership typically tries to avoid primaries wherever they can. But if there's no momentum there And I'm telling you, these virtual conventions on both sides, honestly, I believe are going to be a flop. I think nobody's going to be excited for these. There may be viewership there, but it doesn't have the same pomp and circumstance that an in-person convention brings to the table. Because I mean, it's the next biggest thing, to the Olympics and the Super Bowl. And that level of excitement and camaraderie and messaging and nonstop media coverage, that does a lot for a campaign. But like I said, it has a short lifespan. If it's this close now leading into the conventions, I don't see it getting, barring something crazy happening. And obviously there's lots of crazy things that could happen and are in the midst of happening. I don't
That's
really
2020.
see that. Yeah, I don't see that gap. I don't see that gap widening for Biden at all. Because if there's no excitement for Kamala Harris and that race is tightening this quickly after the announcement, it's going to be brutal for them to get any more breathing room between them and President Trump. And again, an incumbent's an incumbent, and he's going to be incredibly difficult to beat. And we all know how great the polling was last time. I think it's going to be a little bit more on target this time from certain places. But again, I would have that. I would say the race is even much tighter than 9 points.
I was going to say the polls always on the left side because they're not ashamed. They're not afraid of putting out what they have to believe. Conservatives are always afraid of answering a phone and telling people what they believe because they're afraid they're going to be doxxed or they're afraid they're going to be, somehow their views made public, and then people on the outraged left are going to somehow make their life more difficult because of it. So as we call it, the silent majority is keeping silent. That's how these polls get skewed this way, and you see Trump come out ahead in the election, like last time.
Yeah, look, and in all fairness, I mean, they've typically been pretty close, at least in the ballpark. But I don't think anybody ever expected what happened 4 years ago because they were so completely wrong. I mean, they had Hillary winning by double digits. I mean, and I'm talking not 10, 15 points. We're talking 20, 30 points. I mean, it was going to be a slaughter, and it completely flipped on them. And partially, I think that was strategy too. I don't think they were looking at the popular numbers. They were polling nationally, and they weren't polling the electorate states. And the Electoral College again, called it. And so I don't think they'll make that same mistake again. But I still say the polling is going to be pretty off from the reality come election night.
They're making the same mistake again. They're going to go for the popular vote while the Trump campaign does what it always does and tries to get to the Electoral College.
Well, look, to kind of touch on that, I think the brilliant thing that the Trump campaign is able to do is to send out all their surrogates that are very close to the White House. So sending out, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, John Pence, they're sending them out on all these bus tours around the country. And then obviously the president's going out there and kind of, doing a little bit of pepper spraying on the on the important hot, no pun intended there, but on the hot zones, in the Electoral College map, which is not something that the Biden-Harris campaign really is able to do, other than your typical surrogates that aren't really that close to the campaign or to that office. So again, I think
a smelling distance.
Yeah, that's right. So it's going to be interesting to see how this continues to play out. But I certainly didn't think that it would be this close, considering everything that's happened this year. But I also know that people know better. The average voter understands that the coronavirus couldn't have been avoided. And the damage that has done to our economy, and that really a lot of what we're experiencing right now from an economic standpoint was really outside of the president's hands. There's not much he could have done. And I think regardless of how he would have approached the coronavirus, I don't know that we'd be out of the woods, regardless of how he would have addressed it, back in March or April. Guys, thank you again for watching The Yard Sign. We appreciate you. Don't forget to subscribe to the audio portion of our podcast, or the audio version of our podcast, I should say. You can do that at Google, Spotify, and Apple podcast platforms. Coming up, it's going to be on Amazon. It'll be on iHeartRadio, so keep an eye out for that. Again, lots to talk about today, including big news for the Trump campaign. And despite the media really kind of trying to ignore it, it's certainly making huge waves in international politics, and that is the Middle East peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, something that's been in the works for a long time, and certainly something that I'm sure you guys would agree is not what we expected to come out of this administration, given that everybody claims that President Trump is so unpopular internationally. Yet who was at the table, signing, with this agreement with our allies? It's none other than President Trump. Verkuilen, I know this was, certainly a story you were watching. This is something that, again, has been going on for lifetimes. Based on what you saw happen, what do you think is going to come of this? You think they're going to hang on to this long-term agreement?
I think this is the foundation for a functional, I won't say peaceful, I mean, peaceful to whatever degree it can, Middle Eastern polity. So essentially what this is a pact between the UAE and Israel, but on face value, that's what it is. On the underneath, it is a pact against Iran. All of the lower level powers in that region have a reason to fear Iran because of how they've been operating in places like Lebanon, places like places all throughout the Middle East, where they're essentially installing proxies to control other smaller countries. So places like UAE, places like Saudi Arabia, who also have an ally relationship with the US, are like, we need to do something to be in a position to defend ourselves should Iran become more belligerent. And they have been. They've shown the world that. But yeah, I think that this lays the groundwork for other people to fall in line and at least accept Israel as a legitimate country, a legitimate power within the Middle East. A lot of the premise of the tensions in the Middle East have been on the fact that Israel is not legitimate. And this, people will say that it's conditional upon a few things. It's conditional upon some West Bank stuff and East Jerusalem possibly being ceded in the future. That was a possibility in the future as part of normalization of economic relations, but not necessarily a contingent upon the agreement working. But I do think this is a huge deal. This is something that would likely result in less bloodshed, less terrorism, and actually it'll have an effect on how we are able to cooperate with the Middle East over here in the US. This is Nobel Peace Prize stuff. I mean, we had Obama be nominated and receive a Nobel Peace Prize for existing. I don't think he even acknowledged that he received it for a good reason when he accepted it. But this is, if it continues to cascade as it goes forward and the other countries in the Middle East fall in line, this should earn Donald Trump a Nobel Peace Prize, or Kushner, whoever worked it out, primarily. But I think it's a huge deal.
In an ideal scenario and an unbiased scenario, I think you're absolutely right. It's certainly deserving of it, but I mean, we all know they're not going to give it to him. I mean, they're just not. They're too far liberal, and again, globally, they've already made their mind up as to who this president is, and you're right. I mean, I think they diluted the value of the Nobel Peace Prize the minute they gave it to President Obama before he had even taken office. And so, I mean, it'd be nice to see, but I doubt that's coming. But you're right. I mean, it's a huge deal, especially at a time where most of the Middle East is kind of a mess, or it's not even kind of a mess. It is a mess. There's a lot of instability. There's a lot of power vacuum right now. And certainly this may hopefully start some foundation in that part of the world to kind of level things out. But certainly it's been nice to see that we're trying to de-escalate our own presence in that part of the world, and it's one of the other things the president hasn't gotten any credit for, which is bringing more of our troops home out of Afghanistan, out of that part of the world where really, I mean, we just don't have any business there, and there's not much else we can do there. Anibal, what do you think?
Any form of normalizing relations with Israel's neighbors is always a benefit. And I say this as a way, and I agree with Chris, the only way to continue the diplomatic relations is to build the consensus of diplomatic relations. Israel has no relations with Saudi Arabia, has no relations with Bahrain, has no relations with a bunch of other Gulf state nations. And with the signing of the UAE, I think it's the first domino to allow for there to be a Bahrain, Omar, even Saudi Arabia eventually. I wouldn't be surprised if these start to fall into place as the election gets closer and closer. And one thing is for sure, Trump needed a win when it comes to foreign policy. There wasn't that much in regards to China. Yes, we're doing a great job with the trade war there. We have really done a lot with our trade renegotiations with NAFTA, with Japan, with Korea, with Australia. We're building that, and it's doing great, but the media is never going to talk about it. But this is something the media can't deny is a really big deal. Will Trump ever be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize? Never. Kushner, on the other hand, will probably get it before Trump does, which I think is a big deal because, again, you're asking for the U.S. president, the administration, to solve something that's been going on for at least a millennia or even more in 4 years, which is very difficult. And again, if the countries don't even recognize Israel, how do you even start negotiations? You have Egypt, you have Jordan, you have Lebanon, and maybe one or two others. I think Turkey is the other one that recognizes Israel as a nation. This is a big play for Israel when it comes to the local regional issues, but this is an even bigger play when it comes to Iran. This is just as big of a rebuff to Iran than it is to anything else. You have Hezbollah trying to retake the power vacuum in Libya, or not Libya, I'm sorry, and Lebanon, which is its own cluster at the moment. And then you have the pitfalls of Syria. So if they are able to build that coalition to be able to and force the Palestinians to go back to the negotiation table, because their definition of a two-state resolution should still have the language of death to the infidels out of the Hezbollah mission statement. I mean, where do you negotiate from there? It's like you negotiating with BLM. They're asking for the complete destruction of the system. Well, I'm never going to agree with you because I don't agree that the capitalist system is bad for the nation. I think it's one of the best systems that we have out there. So there's no point in even negotiating. So until the Palestinians can come back to the table and negotiate properly, there will be no movement on that side. It puts pressure on them.
I memean, it's unfortunate, that as a country, I think we're just very, and ignorance is a strong word, but I just, we don't really pay attention to what's happening in other parts of the world. And certainly, again, like this, it doesn't help that the mainstream media kind of swept it under the rug. They're like, all right, this happened. They certainly didn't give Trump any credit. Certainly not giving Jared Kushner any credit. But do you think that, maybe this had even a slight impact on these new poll numbers we're seeing, or are people just kind of oblivious to this whole situation?
I think it's too recent to have an impact on these numbers yet, but next week or 2 weeks from now, this should definitely have a play. The thing is, like you're saying, people are oblivious to this kind of thing. Unless you have this on the news constantly, which this should be in the news. This is a huge deal. And people aren't going to know about it. Hopefully between people like us bringing these stories to light, it does make its way out into the public a little bit, but I don't think it's a mainstream news story, even though it should be.
This is creating a huge ripple effect within the within geopolitics. This brings in China trying to get their pipelines through Iran. This brings in Russia trying to deal with Syria. This brings in, so again, if you're able to unite all the Sunni countries under some form of recognition of Israel and against the Iranians, that builds that coalition that needs to happen. And that brings into that, the Houthis in Yemen are weakened because of civil war. The Hezbollah are weakened because it shows the blatant corruption in Lebanon and in other parts in Syria. This is a huge thing. So I wouldn't be surprised in the next month or two before the election, you see a domino effect of countries, and even probably in some parts of Eastern, Southern Asia and Eastern Asia, when it comes to Pakistan, and then when it comes to Turkey, that their relations of Israel are going to have to change, because you cannot have the same relationship anymore. This is a Sunni and Shiite problem, and once Americans realize it, because they're not going to understand this, they're going to understand peace negotiations with Bahrain, peace negotiations with Omar, peace negotiations with the United Emirates. They're going to see that, and they're going to see that as a foreign policy, a win for the president. And that is another thing that dictates when it comes to who gets elected. If there's a large foreign policy, and again, he tried that with Afghanistan. We tried to get out of Afghanistan, and you saw all of the Senate and the Congress get upset with Trump trying to get some kind of deal when it comes to the Taliban, which I won't be surprised if that is an October surprise, that we get a peace deal out of Afghanistan.
Thank you again to everybody watching. This is The Yard Sign, the most important and relevant podcast in politics. We're going to go ahead and reset the show here for a second because we've got two big topics coming up. The blessing that is Kamala Harris on the Joe Biden ticket for the Democrats. And of course, it's the night before primary night, election eve, if you will. And so we're going to break down some of the races that we're watching and, just talk about the temperature out there in terms of turnout. And of course, there's all these circumstances in regards to mail-in voting, absentee voting, early voting, and so we'll pick that apart. Unfortunately, Chris Verkuilen had to go. He may or may not be popping in a little bit later, but still with me, Anibal Cabrera. Hey, buddy.
Hey, sir. How you doing?
Good. So Kamala Harris, like we kind of teased at the beginning of the show in talking about the poll numbers, didn't really give Biden much of a bump. If I'm the Democrats, I'm worried because I would expect this to have had a much more significant impact on the polling that's out there right now.
And you would have expected some kind of bump in the polls when it came to Kamala and some kind of enthusiasm, being the third female to be put on a ticket. And I think this is the second woman of color to be put on a major ticket, maybe first also. The New York Times ruined her launch last week when they said that she was the first since Hillary, and then they completely forgot Sarah Palin. I think what is going to happen now is the reality is going to set in. This is a woman that I don't even think can carry her own state. She dropped out because no one was supporting her. She was getting less than 10% of the African-American vote. She was getting less than 10% on the female vote. And it got sad at the end of her campaign. She did and this is another thing, she did a great job attacking Joe Biden. That was the weird part of why she was still the number one pick on his list. And it's because he had nothing to do with picking her. I honestly think that she was picked by a committee of consultants while Joe Biden finished up a puzzle downstairs.
Well, the most interesting thing about that is that, to your point, she got destroyed in the debates. But funny enough, because I can't believe we haven't mentioned her name in a long time, but it came up in my newsfeed that the person that pretty much took her out in the debates was Tulsi Gabbard.
Yes.
And how was Tulsi's name not in the conversation for vice president? She
would have been a
to
phenomenal pick.
She appealed to Bernie supporters because she had endorsed Bernie, which obviously I get why Biden, was maybe miffed by that. But she could have brought in some of those Bernie supporters that Democrats have been trying to wrangle for a long time. And she really was liked by a lot of people on the right. Your moderates, liked her because of her military service, and even some of her stances on certain issues. She, I think, would have been a huge win for them. Now, being that she is an islander, I don't know if she would have qualified as a woman of color. But that being said, obviously the big conversation right now, even within the Black community, is, Kamala Harris's race and her ethnic background. She's half Jamaican, half Indian, and does she have what a lot of people also accuse President Obama of, the Black experience in the United States?
It's very difficult to express that because you have to have lived that life to know if she can eloquently express that communication. However, you're hearing from a lot of progressives, they're not happy at all with her as the pick. Far left individuals are fuming at the fact that they got her. If anything, they're calling her what is it, cop, calling her a cop in her, putting a cop in her name. But if you extract what the pick really means, the Democrats, when it comes to the echelon, in regards to figuring out a way to get to the presidency, are focusing on the only demographic that Kamala Harris actually gets, and that is the suburban white educated female. That's the only vote she's going to get. She doesn't get the young vote. She doesn't get the black vote. She doesn't get a lot of the votes. And so if Joe Biden is starting to get more of the 65 and older vote, which really was dominated by Trump last time around, then there is going to be some wiggle room for the Trump campaign to build a coalition of the minority community, the black, the brown, and educated and uneducated white men. And that's a weird combination to build, but if he builds it correctly, that definitely puts him over. That puts him over in the popular vote and definitely the electoral.
Well, and if I know my campaign consultants the way that I do, I mean, I think it lends credence to what you just said, because we know that one of the demographics that came out in a very significant way, or at least a way that certainly swung the election, were the white suburban moms. And certainly by a lot of the criticisms that Trump has against him, if they were able to pull away some of that vote with someone like Kamala Harris, maybe that's going to be a successful, angle for them to win this election in November. But again, the polling, and take it for what it is. But I certainly think it's more reliable on the Democrat side to say that they got no bump out of this announcement. And if
no
anything,
bump out of the announcement, they'll get no bump out of the convention, and it's going to be an interesting 80 days to see where this lands. Because again, you're not doing big rallies. The entire DNC is not doing door-to-door campaigning, whereas the Trump campaign and the RNC is still doing it. So the fact that they're still out there, they're still developing volunteers. I mean, we have friends right now that are phone banking and that are walking the streets and that are knocking on doors. And at the end of the day, people still want that kind of retail politics, even though we're in this current pandemic that we're not able to physically be there. But people still want it. People still go to the grocery store. People are still going. They're going to work. I mean, the fact that he's pushing for kids to be back in school is a phenomenal play when it comes to suburban moms. Because again, they would have either already made the decision to homeschool their kids and not be able to do yoga in Starbucks, or continue to send their kids out to school. I mean, these are the conversations that people are having now. And if there is an uptick in the economy, you're going to see it reflect in the polls. But again, you and I know that Trump supporters do not answer polls. They don't answer phone calls. There was a poll recently that talked about 36% of individuals know someone that doesn't talk about politics or doesn't show that they're in politics because they don't want to be, they don't want the backlash of being a Trump supporter.
I mean, we know people that work in politics, they work for candidates, they work for elected officials, and they still don't talk about politics on social media, or to anybody for that matter, because they like to keep their work and life separate. And, nothing wrong with that, but I think that's a clear example. And to your point about there not being a bump, even coming out of the virtual DNC convention that starts this week, supposedly, I don't know, because nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it. I mean, I have friends on both sides of the aisle on my social media profile, and nobody's talking about the conventions. And so I think that plays to Trump's favor. Trump's going to do his thing. He's already getting a lot of press coverage because, he's the president, and so he's already on TV a lot. I think these virtual conventions are going to do zero for these campaigns. And honestly, it may end up being a good case for why they need to survive as an actual event, because the campaigns are going to say, hey, we need this down the stretch, to get us to November. Whereas some people, certainly even when I was working in the convention right over here in 2012, would tell you that there was some question as to whether or not we still needed these conventions that are pretty much ceremonial. It's a coronation of,
but it needs to be a coronation. There needs to be a distinctive selection of the two-party system. Even though people crap about the two-party system all day long, and we hear their complaints all day long, but we tell them, look, you go third party, you see what happens. You're going to destroy one party or the other if you go third party. I think what's going to happen, but I am not going to be surprised if we see Trump pull something out last minute. He's been doing TV his entire life. He knows how to build the audience. He knows what to do when it comes to building that kind of momentum in regards to TV. And that's what he does. That's what he's done for 15 years of The Apprentice and other TV shows that he's been a part of. So like
he's been a celebrity for 40 years, easily.
Yeah. So to think that he's not going to have any idea or doesn't know how to hire the people that can make it more interactive, that can make it more fun, that will allow it to be something different, I wouldn't be surprised if we see something. I haven't heard anyone talk about watch parties for the DNC. I haven't heard anyone talking about going to people's houses and watching the speeches. No one's talking about it. I mean, they can't even get it right. AOC has 30 seconds. Who was the governor, the Republican governor that hates Trump? That keeps on talking smack about him all the time.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
DNC.
Hogan?
No.
Oh, Kasich. John Kasich.
Kasich gets Kasich gets like 6 minutes at the DNC, more than a pre-recorded AOC. Like, that's the thing. We know where they're coming from. And they did a poll, and people, I think 14 to 20% want to see AOC speak, and 2% of the DNC want to see that man speak. So like, it doesn't make any sense what they're doing, but they're doing it because they're paying consultants a lot of money to do it. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, look, I mean, it would benefit us to not have AOC, in that broadcast, and the less screen time she gets, the better, because unfortunately they don't realize that she can move their base. And to her credit, she's not happy with the ticket. She's not. There was even talk about, some of these, more visible members of Congress not being in the agenda whatsoever for this convention. And you have to imagine, regardless of the star power and the leverage that they have with Hollywood and the media, I think you're right. I think this is Trump's home territory. This is an industry, this is a medium that he has been a part of for a long time, understands very well. And if anybody's going to capitalize on a virtual convention where it's primarily on television and stream devices, it's going to be Donald Trump. And I can assure you that he's probably getting a lot of say as to what this production is going to look like, because at this point it's just television production.
Yeah, that's all it is.
It's not an event. It's not an event.
When they canceled the Jacksonville event, you knew it had to change. And again, we're in a pandemic. That it is what it is. It's where we're at in the world. But there needed to be some kind of change, and we're going to see it. I think next week or 2 weeks from now when they do the Republican convention. Because I think the Democrat convention is this week. That's another thing. You're doing elections and then convention. It's insane of what they've allowed themselves to be put into. Also, what's pissing people off is that Nancy Pelosi refused to get Congress back in to vote on extensions for unemployment, PPP, like all this other stuff that ran out in the beginning of August. That she can call people to come back home to make sure that the post office has enough money for elections. Which, if anyone knows what's going on, is that I think the entire country already does some form of mail-in absentee ballot. So to think that this is a new branch of something makes no sense at all. But that's where the priority is. They rather bring up hearings because of something Trump might have said in regards to not increasing funding for the post office, but they're not willing to bring in hearings for people to increase the unemployment and to do all that other stuff. The priorities are completely out of whack, and that's going to start pissing off people.
Well, the most amusing thing is that they're trying to pin some conspiracy theory on Trump, and saying that he's somehow manipulating the funding for the United States Postal Service to try and manipulate the election when Congress holds the purse strings. They control the budget. Like, they should be the ones trying to pass some sort of fix, to get the Postal Service the funding that they need to handle these elections properly. In the meantime, they're trying to make it seem like it's some backroom deal between the president and the head of the Postal Service. Yeah, so
it's not going to look good. It's going to make the one thing the Nancy Pelosi does not want to do is to turn this into an issue election. She wants to keep it as a Trump election, a referendum of what's happened in the last 4 years. And if she keeps that narrative, then we are probably in trouble. But she herself is making it into topics and issues and everything else. And again, he wins on those issues, and he'll continue to.
All right. Well, I think, we've kind of already started to transition to, again, primary night. And again, we're going to be doing a special broadcast live from a secret, for now, location. That's right. But certainly a fun and special location nonetheless, because I think we might even have an audience to work with. So it's going to be fun to get everybody together and kind of see the election results come in. But I haven't been following the numbers closely. And obviously, there's been a big push on both sides, for absentee ballots, these mail-in ballots in other parts of the country. But this is where I think, Republicans typically fare well, which is in absentee ballots. And then, and that, Trump's reelection is a big motivator to get people out there. And in the Tampa Bay area, we have a lot of really hot congressional races that need to be sorted out. And so I'll let you kind of start as far as, what races have you been most interested in?
The races that I'm looking at are congressional districts 15 with Ross Spano and Scott Franklin. I think that's going to be a very interesting race that has turned into something that I don't think anyone was expecting. The congressional race in Pinellas County with, I'm forgetting everyone's
Amanda
name.
Mackey, Anibal,
and Paula Luna is something that's fascinating to see what's about to happen. My wall is about to fall.
Well, kudos to those campaigns. That means they're using heavy paper. They're using that expensive paper. They're using that 20-pound paper. No, look, that's a huge race, and the kind of new dynamic in both the congressional race in Polk County. I always forget the numbers. I get the numbers all screwed up. But between Ross Spano, Scott Franklin, and Anna Paulina Luna, Amanda Mackey, I think Sheila Griffin is still in the mix there, is Matt Gaetz kind of all of a sudden decided to jump in.
Threw his hand in there. And were you it's going to fall again. Were you expecting that at all when it came to people? I had no idea that he was going to do that to Ross Spano, and it kind of was like a quiet insurgency.
No, look, I mean, Matt Gaetz is always unpredictable, to be honest. And, for Matt Gaetz to come in and campaign for Scott Franklin, I think that it could be a huge turning point in that election, maybe, at least leveling the field for Scott Franklin. I think that makes that race a lot closer. And then Matt Gaetz coming out for Anna Paulina Luna in the other race, to me, it seems obvious. This, to me, is an obvious move that he is trying to get people form these alliances with maybe for a presidential run. And maybe he, after in 4 years when Trump's done or whatever, the outcome is in November, I wouldn't be surprised if Matt Gaetz, tries to be the next Donald Trump and takes a shot at the presidency. But to me, this is what you do if you are planning to run for higher office. You make friends, you try to get them into office so that you can kind of expand your clout and start to build that coalition that's going to help you get elected.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we've had this conversation before on this program where the pendulum doesn't continue to swing in the same direction once you've had one extreme to the other. I mean, we saw this with Obama and to Trump. We saw this in the 80s. We've seen this multiple times in U.S. elections when it comes to picking a president, even within the same party, from one to another. So it's very difficult to have a third term consecutive of the same party. It's happened before, but it's not in our lifetime. It hasn't happened. What we can say, though, is in regards to the choices that he's making to back it, it is definitely a play. I don't see Ross Fano losing his race. I think Ross Fano is too embedded in the community. I mean, I've heard him sing the national anthem multiple times at Lincoln Day dinners. Like, he's very well liked. And this for people that don't know what's going on. And again, you and me know what's going on in the background. We know there's a huge financial issue, campaign finance laws that were breached. We're going to see what happens with the finance committee, if they're going to do a ruling or not. We don't know. I don't know if it's going to happen before the election or not. I think that's why Matt Gaetz probably went into that one, to where Ross Fano is somewhat, and I love Ross Fano, but he is a weak candidate if you know what's going on. But again, 80% of the population probably does not know what's going on, and they're going to vote for him anyways because he's in a very R district. Even if he loses the primary, we're probably going to keep the seat as a Republican seat because it's such such a red district. Now,
between that part of the county and Polk County, I mean, it's a very Republican district.
There's no way. Now, flipping Charlie Crist's district is going to be extremely difficult, and it's probably going to cost upwards of maybe $2 million, $3 million to flip that. You're going to have to basically buy that seat, whoever gets it. But I think, again, it's whoever has the deeper pockets is probably going to win that. And I think Mackey has those connections to those organizations and those donors. When it comes to that, a lot of mailers, 2, 3, 5 touches, maybe even in person. So you have to get the volunteer base. I mean, I haven't seen the kind of army that they're going to need to build to take out Charlie Crist. I don't know. The only person I can think of that has that kind of army here in Hillsborough County would be Jackie Toledo. And her base, it is an army that she has built in South Tampa.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to her credit before that, I would say, Dana Young, but it is rare, the candidate that is able to build an army of supporters to go out there and hit the community. But I did want to add, to Spano's credit, he had House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, endorse him. Unfortunately, it was via video. And so you never know how many people saw the video. I don't know to what extent they leveraged that endorsement. Obviously, that's a very respectable endorsement that you would typically see, in a normal situation. But given Spano's circumstances, again, the NRCC has been out of the equation because of, Spano's issues internally with the ethics committee. But they smell the blood in the water, and I think Franklin thinks that race is within reaching distance. We'll find out tomorrow what happens. But I agree with you. I think Spano pulls it out. It's not going to be pretty. And what's the big question mark is: does the NRCC come back into the fray once in the primary? I'm sorry, in the general, when he is going to need a lot of capital to fend off the Democrats, because the Democrats smell blood in the water and they think that they have a shot at that seat. Certainly, if Spano is on the Republican side of the ticket.
I don't think the Democrats made the right decision on allowing the state representative from District 59 to try to punch up into a congressional district. That individual had only ran once. He was elected by a very small margin, beating Joe Wicker during that campaign race. And now you have a very interesting race. And this is State Representative District 59 with Denny Kushner and Michael Owen. I think that's a phenomenal race that's going on right now. I know both of those individuals. I put my support with Michael Owens. I was able to get to know him earlier before he officially started to run. Great guy, great individual, and they're both from the community, but I think Michael Owen pulls that one out in the race. That's something I'm really excited. A little army has been built there in Brandon as well, and I think Michael Owen will pull that one out. I think the more grassroots individuals like Danny Kushner more. But and I like Danny Kushner; he's a great guy. But I think that's what's going to happen. I think the Democrats really left themselves wide open for us to retake 59 and keep District 15.
Well, that particular district is one of those where even though the numbers on paper look to favor Democrats, the turnout historically does not. So they have a large amount of the electorate that stays home in that district on the Democrat side, which makes it a viable seat for Republicans to win. And again, Spano was in that seat for 2 terms, and unfortunately Wicker wasn't able to really kind of capitalize that into his own seat. But to jump from 1 term in the state house to Congress, I think is a little too much too soon, especially for that district that is so red. Breaking down like you just did, between Michael Owens and Danny Kushner, I think, the advantage that Kushner has is that he had run previously for office, actually for that congressional seat, so he kind of did the reversal, and ran for Congress and now has decided to run for state house instead. So he has some built up name ID. He has good consulting behind him, but so does Michael Owens. And I don't know Michael that well, but one of the things that I continue to hear from people is that he is very well known, liked, and respected in the community. And so that's going to be a close race. Now,
and this, in some parts of Hillsborough County, being born a son born and raised in that district, a Riverview, Brandon area, it's essential to be a part of that community, to have the name recognition, to be attending Ottawa Baptist Church. I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to do, a lot of what are the check marks that have to be hit to be able to represent that community and that community correctly. I will switch on to Congressional District 14. I think Quinn runs away with it. She's run with that. She's run to that district before. I think she will win the primary, and then come general election time, I have one of her cards. It came out. She said, I'm going to vote for her. But I don't see, without a monumentous scandal of some kind, I don't see her overthrowing, who's in there now?
Kathy Castor.
I don't see that happening whatsoever.
Look, and this is what we've said time and time again.
Yeah, and we know people that, and not to say negative things about Quinn, but we know people that have had more pedigree and maybe a better resume and that couldn't pull it off.
Yeah, look, the advantage that Quinn has had over other people who've tried to go for that seat has been that she has money and she has connections that have been able to give her money. But unfortunately, it takes multiples of whatever she's raised to even come close to forming a formidable campaign against Kathy Castor. That being said, I had no idea there was even anybody else on the ticket. So, I mean, Quinn wins the primary, but Castor is going to stay in that seat. It is a gerrymandered district. But, I asterisk that with or preface it by saying that it is a gerrymandered district that Democrats have agreed to. And that is a seat that they wanted to protect. And so she is meant to be in that seat. It would take millions of dollars, and it would take a far better candidate and campaign to take that seat from Kathy Castor. And the best opportunity that Republicans are ever going to have at that seat is if it ever becomes an open seat. And look, if Kathy Castor hasn't run for governor by now, she's probably never going to do it. And I think it's because she knows that that's where Democrat candidates go to die. There's just no future for Democrat candidates in running for governor here in Florida, not right now. And
it's and that you and I have talked about this before. It's because they pick Democrats from either the northern parts or the southern parts of Florida. They never pick someone from the I-4 corridor to run for governor, which you would think would be the smartest thing to do, but they never do it. It's very difficult for Democrats to do that. Republicans have done it and they've won. Bob Martinez, I can think of the top of my head, was from Tampa and was able to become governor. So it works in the Republicans' favor, but it never works out in the Democrats' favor. Let's switch to
here, real quick, I just want to add, a little kind of note to Democrats is that if you do want to have a shot at winning the governor's seat, There's two names that I think could do the trick for you, which is Buddy Dyer, former mayor of Orange County, and Val
Yes.
Demings. Honestly, Val Demings, I think, in all of this VP talk has gotten so much exposure that if anybody can put together a run for governor and possibly rally the Democrats to vote here in Florida, it's going to be one of those two. And they hail from the I-4 corridor.
The problem with her is that she is too, and the Democrats as a whole are so adherent to the Puerto Rican vote that they think that's what's going to put them over the edge. When you obviously have no idea when it comes to the Hispanic vote whatsoever, that you're going to get crucified in South Florida if you do any kind of Democrat that's going to try to run to the left when it comes to Democrat policies, but with trying to spin it with the Cuban Republicans. And Puerto Ricans are just they're not a monolith yet. They are, and again, for those that just moved to the state and to the country, they're more focused on getting their kids settled in school, getting jobs, building a house, and I would see maybe maybe a generation or now that there'll be more of a isolated block like the Cubans or other Hispanic groups in Florida. That takes time, and that's not something that's going to happen quickly. I say the Puerto Rican vote is very fluid and is not set on a home yet when it comes to their political affiliation.
Yeah, no, those are good points, and still, I think they are sorely overlooking Buddy Dyer. I think he's moderate enough for Florida, and I think he's somebody that could pull votes maybe from the Republican side. I may be saying too much, here and giving away too much of.
Democrats aren't watching. It's fine.
Yeah, but it's certainly, I think, maybe possibly their best choice they might ever have. Because. Man, Andrew Gillum, what an embarrassment. But we won't go down that rabbit hole.
We will, and we'll do it in private. But that was a phenomenal crash and burn. Isn't he in therapy right now? I don't know.
I think he's in rehab. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's where you go when you get caught in a hotel room. Therapy.
Yeah, down in Southwest Florida, another very crowded congressional primary for Republicans, but the two standouts, I think polling at above 20% are Dane Eagle and our good friend Byron Donalds, who apparently is right now considered the front runner. And to Byron's credit, he's been doing great stuff on social media, posting a lot of videos, doing Q&As. And then just here in the last 2 weeks, he's been rolling out the endorsements like crazy. I mean, he's gotten all the right endorsements to give him the credibility, and the conservative credentials that he needs to pull out this win. And I think it's looking really good for him tomorrow night.
When it comes to endorsements, it's all about timing and the actual individual, because some politicians just go out and try to grab any endorsement whatsoever. They try to go for the firefighters union. They try to go to other organizations, they try to go to other politicians. And sometimes it doesn't work. Even though you might have all of them, you still lose because you're going after endorsements that don't matter for that particular race.
Yeah.
You have to know the race that you're running to be able to make that decision. And what's happening, he's doing a great job. Also with social media, I think this is the time that we're going to see how much you spend and your numbers and data that is produced from the touch points of Facebook or another social platform will reflect into votes. Because the goal is, if you can't get out there and touch people by knocking on doors, then you're going to need to get in front of them again. And Jonny, you know this, you need to be in front of people at least 3 to 4 times before they vote for you. And people forget that the internet is definitely a tool, and we're going to see if it manifests into votes this time around. We know judges that are throwing a large amounts of money to their social medias to make sure that they're in front of people. So when it counts, it counts. Yep. And, now we're seeing a lot from the sheriff of Hillsborough County. A lot of social media money is being dumped to ensure that he's going to Sheriff Chad Cronister will win that election. What do you think about that dynamic between Boswell and Cronister?
Well, that's going to be, the race for us to kind of wrap it up for today on, because I think, while Boswell's made a lot of noise, the Cronister campaign has hit back, as expected, given the team that Cronister has behind him. He's also gotten some really solid endorsements, Pam Bondi, Ashley Moody. He's gotten all the right endorsements for the Republican base to maybe take a second guess as to whether or not they're going to stray away from Chronister in this election. I'd see him right there on your wall of mailers, and look,
Yeah.
I certainly think he's gotten word or is noticed that, hey, mistakes have been made. But I also know that behind the scenes, he's tried to rectify some of those mistakes with the people involved. And to his credit, I think that goes a long way. Hopefully, he'll continue to do that because, from a political perspective, he has fractured the base a bit. But I still think that pales in comparison to the support that Boswell was able to shore up to go up against somebody as well funded and visible as Chronister is. Because as you said, if anything, the biggest generational difference that we saw between Chronister and David G was certainly his use of social media. And his office has been very effective at it, and his campaign's been effective at it. And it's one of those things where Boswell has been doing a lot of the grassroots stuff, but not really a lot of the digital and online stuff. And again, this is a very different electorate than previous years. And while Boswell has been able to pull away some of that base support at on the Republican side, I don't think it's going to be enough, especially since the sheriff has kind of hit him on some of his past in the recent days as people are doing their early voting. And so
I agree with you. I think that's number one. Sorry for cutting you off. I think that's number one issue when it comes to Boswell.
Yeah.
If his past was cleaner and he wasn't embroiled in a lawsuit with the sheriff's department, and that there wasn't issues with his ability to testify in other cases, if there wasn't so many of those issues, I think the general public would have a much more willingness to take him and vet him and then move forward with him as a vote. Also, Chad Chronister is a already sitting sheriff. It is very difficult to remove a sheriff without there being some kind of huge scandal or issue. And the only thing you're having is that Chad Chronister knows the game that he's playing. He is a county-wide Republican elected official playing in a predominantly purple / almost blue now Hillsborough County. And that game, he's played very well to ensure that he doesn't piss off many people, but that he gets he does the job that you do in a general election, and that is to be elected by as many people as possible. And that's what he does every single time. And he's done a great job with it. He's done also a great job as sheriff. We might not be happy as a Republican with some of the edicts that were brought down or the steps that he did not take. However, at those emergency group policy meetings, he was the voice of reason many times, pushing back against the mayor, Jane, and pushing back on other very liberal county commissioners that were speaking absolutely nonsense. A curfew, the mandatory masks. I mean, these were just astronomically stupid moves that did nothing for the safety, but just wanted to put a Band-Aid on something that was getting out of control.
Yeah, look, his biggest misstep in all of this was the arrest of Pastor Rodney White, and obviously that made national headlines. But it's certainly a miss, and I don't even know. I personally, I remember not really taking an issue with it because I thought it was a clear violation of the policy that had been put in place because of the pandemic. That being said, Republicans obviously took issue with the arrest of a pastor, and I totally understand that as well. Certainly causing for some of that fracture to happen among his base of support. That being said, what got little coverage was the fact that he made amends with the pastor, and they have repaired and actually built on that relationship ever since. And again, the people who have followed that story are aware of that. But it certainly made a lot of Republicans out there second guess their support. But I think they'll all fall in line, after this primary happens, and see what he's going up against in terms of a Democrat opponent. So
and
I think Chronister pulls it off.
I agree, but let's see what he does at the end. If Boswell does lose this primary and decides to back the Democrat or the independent in that general race, will speak volumes of the Republican red meat individual that he is and that his supporters are. I find that a lot of them are either this is the first time they're actually like active in a cycle, or that they're constantly calling. And again, this is how you know that these individuals have only been here for 1 or 2 cycles. They're calling everyone that doesn't agree with them a rhino, Republican.
Yeah.
And that is the worst. I mean, I'm watching a friend's Hector knows this very well, that he was attacked online because he had a difference of opinion. And the moment a candidate starts to break the base that way, left and from how conservative can you possibly, you don't understand the politics of Hillsborough County. And that's what people need to understand, that if the leadership, and I'll say this out loud, if the leadership of the HREC or any other large political organization in Hillsborough County doesn't understand that the goal is to get elected in a purple/blue county, you cannot run so far to the right to where you alienate 60% of the county. It won't work. And that's what I think Boswell has done. He has moved so far to the right that it allows him to look foolish to the general public. So if he were to ever actually beat Chronister and go into the general, it would be a disaster, and we would lose one of the few Republican state county-wide races. And that's where I want to make sure that we don't put ourselves in that position again. Real quick, who is I think AG for Hillsborough County is also coming up?
Oh, Mike Perotti is going up against Andrew Warren.
I want to say, because we only lost that by like 3,000 votes.
Super close. Yeah, it's a very close race.
I think that he will pull it off in the general. I think he will win or pull it off in the primary and win in the general. I'm really looking forward to his candidacy.
Yeah, Mike Perotti is a very good countermeasure to Andrew Warren, and I think especially given what's happening with the Black Lives Matter and the protests and the riots and all that kind of stuff, that's opened the door for Mike Perotti to make a really solid run at that position, and I hope to have him on before the November elections come around.
I know,
because I've heard. Yeah, I've heard great things so far, and I think he's going to be a good countermeasure to Perotti, who did appeal to both sides, when he ran for the first time 4 years ago. But it's one of those situations where that seat I don't think is safe for Democrats, and Perotti could be the guy to run away with it. So, last point on the sheriff's race is to that. Again, he's well funded, he's well liked, and Chronister pulls out that win, because again, he's built this base of support for so many years, and Boswell just didn't really kind of play this the right way. I think you're right; like he just kind of went too hard, too fast, and too far to the right, and the county isn't what it used to be. But going back to what you were kind of touching on as far as the Hillsborough County Republican Party leadership is that if you continue to call enough of your Republican voters rhinos, and pushing them away from the party, well, guess what? Eventually, you run out of rhinos and Republicans. And that's why the Big Tent approach to our party works. And there's no room in winning elections for a purity test, and that's what a lot of these people are trying to pull off here. And they continue to lose, and they don't know why. They don't understand why, and it's because Hillsborough County is very different from Polk County and very different from Miami-Dade County, and you can't pull shenanigans like that here and still expect to win elections. So, anyways, on that note.
Real quick, we have examples of Republicans being able to run their races in predominantly Democrat large communities. Again, Jackie Toledo has done a phenomenal job running her race and being someone that pulls from both sides and pulls independents. And she's been able to figure out that lane. And if more Republicans in Hillsborough County could do that, we'll get more city council seats, we'll get more county commissioner seats, because that's just how that's how the cookie crumbles. You have to start thinking it that way. And
it's knowing your audience.
Yeah, you have to know your audience, and you have to know the base. And once you figure that out, you'll win these races.
Yeah.
But we're doing that.
All right. Well, we kind of ran long, but again, there's lots to talk about, and there will be more to talk about as we do a special show from a very special location tomorrow as we have our primary election night. We'll be covering the results not only locally, but statewide and nationally as well. I'm sure there's going to be some surprises, and never a dull moment with these characters that we have here on the yard sign. So join us back here tomorrow. I think we're going to go live 7 o'clock. So we'll stick to 7 o'clock as our broadcast time tomorrow night as the results start to come in, and we'll have a larger cast of characters to chime in on the election results as we get them. So we thank you so much for watching the yard sign. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on YouTube and the audio version of our podcast on Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcast platforms. For now, for the next 24 hours, I'm your host, Jonny Torres. Anibal Cabrera has been joining me. Thanks again to Chris Verkuilen, who's out there doing his diligence as a Republican and trying to get more votes for this primary election. We'll see you guys tomorrow night.